Today we have Rishad Ahmed with us. You are the first non-musician guest, Rishad. And we are going to talk about the art of listening, because I think in your field, you're an expert in listening amongst other things. Also in your study, your research, you are interested in the way we communicate. So it will be very interesting from the musician's point of view to listen to your approach. So welcome.
Thank you.
So what is the art of listening? What do we use when we listen? What do we focus when we listen to something? And how can life can be improved by us becoming better listeners?
Okay, so thank you, Maria. To start off with, intention is the biggest thing. So listening is commonly thought of as utilizing our ears so that sound can come in, right? So what we understand as listening is interpretation, right? Interpreting what's coming in, analyzing, and also what other purposes they are. So is it for entertainment? Is it for spiritual growth? Is it for connecting to something more mysterious? Or when it comes to communication, then communication has branches of purpose and intention as well. Are we passive listeners? For instance, if you're watching a movie, you're using your ears, but you're passively listening. And then when you're looking at another human being, then what is the purpose? Is it there to be a presence for them? Or is it there to answer their questions, right? Or is it there to argue or to win a discussion? So it's very much based on intention. So I think if we start off with intention and start off with what is our intention, then we can dive into that, because listening, as we understand it in a very generic way, is termed as one entirely universal thing. You listen, and simple, use your ears, that's it. Why do you listen? How do you listen? Is all the same. Actually, it's not. Why you listen is very important, and how you listen is very important as well. So if you're, let's start off with, let's go right to the most significant aspect of listening. So first of all, what is listening? Rather than who is listening, what is listening? So what am I? So I'm composed of the personality. I'm composed of, if we use psychoanalysis terms, we can talk about our mind, we can talk about our ego, we can talk about our soul, and that's what defines me at the center of the listening experience. Now, am I at the center of listening experience, or am I participating in a listening experience? So if I believe that I'm at the center of the listening, then there's nothing else to perceive outside of me, because it's simply an apparatus. So if you think about a microphone and it's recording a voice, and then you have a recorder recording the conversation, that's all it's doing. And that's what we in normal human communication think we're doing with our ears. We're just listening for the sake of listening, passively hearing. So words are very thin when it comes. There's only got two words in English language: is hearing and listening. That's about it, right? And there's no other word that we have. But so if we start right at the top and say what is listening, then we've got to ask by becoming quiet inside. Because how do we answer that question? Because we can say, well, it's me listening. But then if we pause for a moment and we relax our ears, relax our eyes, because they're both sensing and interpretation. They're the connection to the outside world of how we interpret the world. Right now, if we close our eyes, remember that's the only sensing tool that is always on, because your eyes closed at night. Your sense of smell also fades quite a lot And a lot of the times when there's a fire, a lot of people recognize that very late as well. And I'm talking about humans specifically, because other animals have different senses. So our ears are always engaged. So if you think about it, our ears never rest. They're awake when we're sleeping and when we're awake. So eyes rest, so we can get a fresh start. So the other thing about listening is that if you pause for a second, you realize that when there's no words, you're still listening, because there are thoughts that talk with a language that, so what is that conversation? So if there's no conversation out there and you're in here, then do you have a quiet moment? Because your ears are listening outside all the time, even when you're sleeping. And when you're awake, when you're not outwardly listening, you're inwardly listening. Right? So a lot of the times what ends up happening in communication is that we're listening to the person and then we're listening to ourselves, saying, what is that person saying? I think he's attacking me, so I'll reply with this. And it's that voice inside of you that's actually you're having a conversation with. So there's a dual function, there's dual scenarios happening there. And then we also talk about listening to our hearts. So then, what sound does the heart make? How do we hear our hearts speak? Now, does anybody even pause to reflect that if the mind is quiet, then what makes sound? Like, how does the heart speak to you? Because my heart speaks to me. Artists, musicians, poetry, it gets revealed through something within themselves and the words come out. But are the words spoken first within and then without? Or do they not make a sound inside? So when I listen to my soul, my heart speaking, it doesn't use words, right? There is no echo inside. Because people misunderstand Rumi said, there's a voice inside of you that does not use words. Listen to it. Now, the words are generally from thought, from repetition, from feedback. It's a feedback mechanism. But if we tune that out, then there is no sound, but yet there is speaking. So when you listen to your heart, you can't hear your heart from here or from inside your thoughts, but it's speaking to you. So it was always this thing when I pondered, is that quieten down the voices in your head, and then people find in a quiet place in meditation where they sitting still without any distractions, so that the outside noise is quieted down, and then they watch their mind. And this is a part of Zen practice or any type of spiritual practice. And then you're tuning into, you're finding that space between thoughts, and you're widening that space. This is what commonly understood in meditation. So between one thought and the other, there's a space. Right? Most people don't know there's a space that exists between one thought and the other. If that space is dropped into, then you're almost at the center of that space in between the two thoughts, right? Now, at that point, if there are no more repetitive thoughts and the internal voice quietens down, then what are you listening to? Now, you dropped into that space of stillness between thoughts, which is this now connecting to the eternal silence, the cosmic silence, which the word itself, silence, which is fascinating to me, it's a whole wonderful journey to me, is that it's the lack of something. It's nothing. There's no thing there. Yet that is precisely why words now fail us. And this goes back to left brain thinking, which is, well, point the object out to me and I can see it, and I can feel it, and I can categorize it. But the right brain, which is linked to the heart, does not use placement. it takes in what they call a gestalt, right? The whole experience. Now, that whole experience can only be known, right? It can't be understood. And now, you being in music is precisely that. A great painting, a great music, a great piece of music, and I was just reading about the ocean. The ocean roars, and yet there's this wonderful. It's a line from a poem, and it says, "The ocean roars majestically, but there is no one there to hear it." Right? But if you actually listen to the roar of the ocean, it's such a music. It's such a symphony. It's an entire field of awareness. But if you're listening with your left brain, which means I would say your left brain would be listening from your ears for the sake of interpretation, right? Which is the fatal flaw, because interpretation can only happen from a limited mind, which is contained in your conditioning, your environment, your upbringing, and all the rest of it. For instance, if you hear an ambulance, what happens to you? You think of a sick person, you think of a dying person, you think of someone stole something, right? But if you've never heard an ambulance before, then would it create that same impression? So many sounds are already being categorized by the left brain and then discarded, and we throw it out. But who's to say that the sound of the ambulance could not be music? Could not be something that if you take and you have this wonderful gift where you can hear the different pitches. If you took the sounds of the ambulance and broke them up into pieces, you could actually create a song from it. Obviously, the sound of the ambulance is designed in such a way to interrupt your normal patterns, but it's interesting. So if you discard your conditioning, then what is listening becomes again the central theme. If it's not your conditioned ear, which is linked to your conditioned mind, then what is listening? So it's very beautiful. It's I've drifted off topic a little bit here, but I think it's just a magnificent exploration. It's too much focus on listening for the sake of interpretation and listening for the sake of categorization, right? Which is part of interpretation.
I think this is very relevant to music studies, because when we get into the academies, universities, it's all about interpretation, learning the facts, understanding the ethics, the aesthetics rather, of the era, being so precise. But when you get out in the real world and you have to make it as a performer, you have to now liberate yourself from all of that and find the space that will make you noticed. So it's very interesting how you say you have to start listening between what you know, what your conditioning is, how. So it goes back to creativity. And would you like to talk a little bit about creativity and silence and how you can create things out of nothing? Because I think most of us musicians, we try to create out of something. There is already an idea that we want to bring to the world, rather than slowing down, like you described, rather than slowing down, getting silent and let the idea emerge. That's a very different process. And I think it would be useful for our students as well that learn music now to see how creativity can be helped by just by silencing yourself down and just listen internally to what you described before, like your heart, whatever you said already.
Yeah, so creativity is a beautiful thing. What we've understood, again, another term that's been highly confused, because we have an understanding of creativity. Let's be creative. And when we say let's be creative, the first thing we do is we take our whiteboard out and our pens out and we start drawing. The first step of creativity is sitting in absolute stillness. right? No sound, no stimulation, no mind. And this is goes back to Japanese concept of mushin, right? And so this idea of no mind, mind before mind. So it's so creativity. If you want to create, then it's almost an arrogant statement to say that, because you are not a creator. You are the one who's a conduit to the creation. So you are participating in the act of creation. You can't create something that does not exist. Well, you can create something new out of what exists, but in order to create something new out of what exists, you have to be able to tune in to what exists and what is there. So we talk about this universal song, the frequency, the wave, the pulse. If you look at the ocean, I mean, what's guiding the song of the ocean? Why does it roar at that particular I don't know all the musical terms, but there's a tempo, right? Tempo, I think, is the thing. What's causing that? Now, if you can't tune in to the creative forces behind the ocean's music, then you have nothing to express, because you've not tuned in to what creativity is for. Because creativity is you being available, present enough, still enough for something to come and emerge through you. But you are not the creator, right? So creativity is the process of allowing. And now, in order for you to allow, you can't come with you to the table, because the moment you take your piece of paper and your whiteboard, right, draw 3 circles, what have you done? You basically remove the process of creation. So creativity starts, and if the word creation is in there, is to participate in the act of creation, which is not your task. Your task is not to create. Your task is to participate in the act of creation. So even before you grab an instrument, or you take a pen or a paintbrush, it's very important for you to learn the art of stillness and the art of silence, and people don't get taught that. So if you go to music school, they'll tell you all about the sounds, the outward, but they will never tell you the thing that I always quote, and you read it in my new book, is that the thing that is the most important element to every song is the space between the sounds. Because if there was no space, there'd be no sound, there'd be no music. Yet we're so focused on the sound that we forget about the silence that makes the sound possible. So silence is primary, it's not secondary. It's from silence that music emerges. So yes, so as musicians, as creators, as creative people, we have to allow the creative force to flow through us, and that requires humility. It requires reverence, and it requires awe. Awe is the ability to have the childlike wonder again, to wonder again. But if you've heard Beethoven's symphony, was it the 10th, right? I think it's this famous one, is the 9th, yeah, it was the 9th symphony. Then you say, oh, well, that's it. You've categorized it, and that's all it is. Now, could you listen to 9th symphony without you being there? It's a difficult task, right? It's not the task for someone who with a trained mind and a trained ear. It's for the novice, and so there is the process of music school, which is not to be discounted, because it's about learning how to use the instruments and to know and to categorize and identify, all useful. But then you become the musician, and now you want to produce or allow something to emerge through you. which is at the point where it's the most difficult thing now, because now you have to let go, you have to unlearn, and this is applies to life, right? So you know, because that's where I started and where we met, is that we have to now unlearn. You know, this is how life works. These are the rules. This is, I can't get this because I got this, and you know, that happens because this happens. And I'm saying, what happens if that's not true? So the first step is to question and realize how polluted and how limited our minds and our ears are, without being judgmental. It's not in any way condescending to say you know nothing. In fact, it's the same thing of the Zen master when the student came to meet the Zen master, and the Zen master poured him tea, and he kept on pouring tea, and the student said, you know, you got to stop pouring tea. The cup is full. And he says, this is exactly like you, right? I can't give you anything because you're full. So it's lovely when Zen and the Japanese always use, and the Chinese and the Eastern teachings always use this analogy of a cup too full already. So nothing new can emerge. So for a musician and for a creative, it's to empty your cup, right? That's the first step. And to empty your cup requires great humility, because you've got to say, I know nothing, even though you've learned so much. And that ignorance is not ignorance, that ignorance is innocence, right? And innocence is the spark of life, and it's the wide open eyes of a child. You know, my 9-year-old was listening to baby screaming, and she said, well, why is that baby making such weird noises? I said, she's just experimenting with a vocal cord, because she didn't even know. She's like, oh. And then she notices that if she does a particular sound, the mother turns around and gets attention, and she says, well, I'll remember that one for future use, right? So they do all these sounds, and they don't even know what this incredible voice and the, you know, what's going on through our ears, and they're loving the process. Now, could you do that? You know, be so ignorant, which I think is innocent and very powerful, to say, let's start again. And all these creative ideas that ever came out of business, out of anywhere, was that maybe it is possible. I mean, you look at Gaudi and you look at some of the abstract painters. It was not possible to do this with the paintbrushes. It was not possible to put your dreams on paper. It was just this on the canvas, and there it was. And it was so abstract that it required for you to, the witnesser of the painting, is to become totally in a different mind. And that was the appeal of abstract art as well. It's just that you had to invoke something that was not easily accessible. Now, for you to create something, now music is very similar, right? Because it is from that side that new emerges, is that you go into, so if you look at the dream, abstract painting, taking a dream, what's the famous one of, I've got the one with the clock, I'm thinking of the picture of the dream with the clock, and what's his name? Not Gaudi. What's some of the abstract painters, the famous one?
Dali.
Dali, yeah. So there's Dali's one painting, and so you could say it was, you know, he was high or he was whatever in another state. And music is very similar. It's this ecstatic state that brings forward music, and it doesn't just apply to classical music. It applies to all music. It comes out of this space. So I think it's very important to delve deep into the other side of listening, not for the sake of creating, but the sake of wonder and awe and innocence.
Which brings me to the next question, which is like the main question of this interview. Are musicians really good listeners? Because we are supposed to be all our life around music, so listening should be our strong skill. But there are all of these anecdotes about how musicians lack social skills, how we don't communicate very well, because we spend too much time practicing, not too much interaction with humor. That was my excuse for a very long time. But recently, because I am now interacting with young musicians as part of the work, I am noticing that there is a need for expressing that is so strong that sometimes block the listening process. So although these are very nice, very good performers, and they go, and when it comes to a communication with each other, I find that there is a little bit of a problem. So I would like to talk about how good listeners musicians are. I think you already touched on that, and how we try to perform, or send out our interpretation of things rather than slow down and start getting things in as well. I know where it comes from, because music itself is a very, very difficult art to master. We constantly have to challenge ourselves, and is one obstacle after the other. It never ends. So in that way, you start becoming a little bit isolated in trying to prove that you are there. You are what you think you are. You are who you would like to be outside in the world. But yeah, how good listeners musicians are, and maybe we can go through like a process of what happens when you go on stage to play something. How can you use your ear for that, and before you just touch the piano or your instrument, and then how can a musician be a better listener with people? It's not music, it's about actually communication.
Yeah. So a couple of points that you mentioned. The first point about musicians listening to others, that's slightly different to musicians listening for music, right? Because they're two different things. So musicians and creatives are generally, I find, and quite a few people would say the same thing, not great communicators with other people, right? In many ways, and I think that's got something to do very different with the wiring. In one way, especially classical music students or musicians are very much mathematical. They're involved, their brains, because certain regions of the brain develop more intensely, they're listening for maths, actually. They're listening for how things align and how things attune, and basically for the sake of recognition as well. So then when it comes to communication with other people, it requires an entirely different part of you, an empathetic side of you, a need to invest into the act of interaction, and in order to facilitate or grow communication and become for relationships, for strengthening yourself in relationships. And that's why you find a lot of artists are not great at selling. They're terrible at selling, and they're terrible at speaking as well. And that's a sign of a great artist in many ways. And I can see why. I can get that, why they wouldn't be superior communicators. So that's understandable in one level when it comes to not just musicians, when it comes to creatives, as far as artists and all the rest of it. Regarding the second part of what you're saying, it sounds strange, just as it sounds strange that the most important element of music is silence, that the most important element of composing or playing a song or playing a melody is actually listening rather than playing. So again, your audience becomes your primary focus. So I say, when I speak to an audience, I'm more tuned in to what they're doing than what I'm saying, which doesn't make sense, because the whole point, if you look at the art of speaking and what they'll teach you in speaking school or in acting school, it's all about voice, your lines, your this, your that, and very little to do with the other side. Now, when it comes to a camera, I can understand that it's not, but that's why some of the greatest actors in Hollywood and places like that come from theater. Why is that? Because it's that interaction with the live audience that makes them superior. So they're tuned in to the audience. And so to tune into the audience, I say when I go on stage and I'm delivering a speech, I'm listening to the audience. So that doesn't mean obviously while my mouth is moving, my ears and every other sense of mine is tuned into the audience, because I want to be in flow with the audience. And other than it delivering a spectacular performance, which it will do for your musicians, it makes you become aligned with you internally, because there's a part of you, you're not just, that's why people get on stage and they say they're nervous, right? Because they're nervous because they're out of tune with their audience, right? So, but if you're in tune with the audience, then you're not there, right? Because your field of awareness is no longer me delivering here, it's about that coming all around. So if there's a symphony and you're participating in that symphony, then you're just one of the gaps that fill in this symphony that's already happening. Now you can use your instrument, and I can use my voice to harmonize the audience, to create that flow. But you have to be aware that there is an energetic flow around the room, and you can't sense that with just your ears. You've got to be tuned in. And so I think the most important part of preparing for a performance is to become so tuned in. And it's not about becoming in a quiet place. Go into the market, take the train to the performance. You don't have to go in a sealed taxi, because you're tuning in to everything around you. You're actually tuning out of yourself, and you're becoming one with the audience. So then in that process, you're connecting so deeply, and that connection happens even before eye contact. And you can try this as a performer, is get on stage and don't look at the audience, but connect with them within you, and then glance at the audience and watch how your eyes connect to their eyes. It becomes this magnetic glue onto you. Why? Because you've already tuned in. What many people do is they start with eye contact, and they're like, obviously it depends on the type of music. If you're doing the piano, then it's very difficult to have that eye contact all the time. But if you're a singer, for instance, your eyes are not as important as your voice connecting to the audience. So you are the least most important act, and the audience is the center of the act, and you're participating in the act again. So it's this humility again, and this is replicated if you read Camus as well, who I love quoting as well, Albert Camus. All these great musicians or people involved with music were great listeners, but they weren't, because what we talk about great listener now, what the modern day understanding of great listener is someone who can be sympathetic and empathetic to your problems. And I think that makes a terrible coach or terrible therapist, because that means that you sit and you agree with the person on the other side instead of helping them, right? Because they've come to you not to become an echo chamber, but for you to go, whoa, that doesn't. And so you attended my coach training course, and you'll find that if you tune in to yourself and to the words that are being spoken, and you keep on listening, you'll be like, what did you say that? Because that doesn't. So rather than you analyzing what they're saying, you're actually tuning in to the difference in how they're saying it. And now, as a musician, you could use the example of their pitch changes, or their tone changes, or even their harmony changes. You'll find that. For instance, I'm telling you something, and then I want to say something that I feel is not true. You'll notice that my breath quickens and my voice starts going faster. As I'm talking now, I'm running out of breath. I'm trying to convince you about something, right? I do that unconsciously. Now, if you're tuned into that, you'll be noticing that. And then you can pause and go, well, let's go over that point again. Do you really believe in what you're saying? Right? And then that person would say, and you find there's a lot in communication, and they'll say, to tell you the truth, right? Or they'll say, if I'm being entirely honest, And I always joke with my clients, and I say, "So you were lying to me all this time," But it's not. It's a figure of expression that we say, "Okay, if I'm going to be honest, but that's the truth, right? So what were you doing before you were honest?"
Yeah, I think with musicians, we are okay when the music starts. This kind of humility, like you say, we become this conduit. We have to empty ourselves from ourselves to be able to perform. And in that moment, I think the room connects with us. It's what happens until you make these 10 steps to your piano from the edge of the stage to your piano. What happens in preparation before? But thank you for separating the communication with words and the communication through music, because yeah, I think as musicians we are very good in expressing ourselves, and then we try to express ourselves in everything else. But that, I find, that blocks listening. So
Actually, musicians are not good at expressing themselves vocally to other people. They're very good at expressing themselves through an instrument.
yeah, exactly, that's what I mean, through the music.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the reason why, because we're so used,
Right.
and also because there are no words, our feelings and our spirit is much better carried rather than translated or interpreted by something that cannot, put things in boxes. Language sometimes restricts you, though
Yes.
music is something open, something free.
Yeah.
That's, I think, is we're lucky that we have that. So, do you think becoming a better listener is a good skill for life? How can our life improve if we learn to slow down, to listen to the silence, to actually not try to always communicate outwards with words, just like you described it really beautifully at the beginning, how we have to let things being expressed through us. So how can that be used in everyday life?
Well, it's I believe the key to quality life. Before I go on to that, just a couple of things when it comes to the musician taking the steps towards the piano. Those 10 steps that you take, at every step, you start disappearing more and more. And by the time you hit the piano, you're not there anymore. And then you can perform. So the whole idea is, instead of, because a lot of people train you to get rid of the nerves by you centering inside yourself. But I say, start disappearing at every moment. So the time you're in front of the audience, the time in front of the piano, you're not there anymore, and you've become the conduit. I think nervousness occurs when you take ownership. And I think if you relinquish ownership to a higher force that is coming through you, then it requires you to become so small and so insignificant. And that's why. That's then the audience puts you high. But when you come up saying, "I need to be seen," the audience brings you down. So when you allow this majestic force that is creating the ocean currents and creating everything in nature, with that humility, and you step up to that piano, serving life through you, then that audience receives that. And so they're not receiving you, they're receiving that, and you become the conduit. So they clap for you, but what they're saying is that I connected, you allowed me. By you removing yourself, you allowed me to connect to what I ultimately wanted to feel. That's why I came for this performance. I want not to see you, is what to listen to that eternal, beautiful creation that we all know intuitively, that voice of our soul. So I think that's one thing. The second thing is, I think this is the most important time in humanity for artists to appear. And I think musicians play such a key role. And for me, classical music being a beautiful expression, is very much needed right now. And it's not in no way. There were times before where musicians were revered, and I think now, especially classical music, has not been given that prime time which it deserves, because I think there's a lot to classical music, and classical music, being Western classical music, but also Eastern classical music, and all sorts of classical themed music. And of course, the voice and song is all wonderful, but I think a lot of people in this time, Joseph Campbell said so beautifully, if you want to know what a society values, look at the buildings in the city. And if you look today, it's all the investment bankers and banking and offices to do with money that are, dominating the skyline. And if you look back into the centuries, you'll find the cathedrals. And even if you go to Moscow, I was in Moscow and saw the Bolshoi Theater, and it's quite a sight, or the Mariinsky Theater in St. Petersburg, or in London, or in Italy, or all over. And then the cathedrals being a place of music as well. It was a very different time, and so I think music is extremely valuable, and artists are needed, very much needed. So, and you will be rewarded, because not everyone that goes into investment banking retires a billionaire, because everybody wants to go into the fields where they can make the most money, and which is a really narrow view of existence. And I love, again, Joseph Campbell. He says, follow your bliss and the universe will open doors where there were only, I think, blocks, to paraphrase Joseph Campbell. So if your bliss is to bring more beauty into the world, or bring the conduit, then music is a wonderful avenue. So I'm so glad to have you doing what you're doing, and I hope you never get tired of bringing so many musicians and doing such an incredible job for music and for art and for culture in this world, which I think is very important. So thank you, Maria. Shall I answer your last question about silence?
Okay, thank you.
So if you can tune in, and so one of the practices I get clients to do is to spend one day not talking. So one day not talking at all. So in other words, just being silent, just observing, just watching, allowing, nodding, participating, present. Just don't talk for a day, right? And of course, if someone asks you what's wrong with you, you can say, I'm just listening today. I'm not speaking. So it's not a case of that. But get on the train, get on the bus, walk around the city, go at home, listen to the birds, listen to the vacuum cleaner in the room upstairs. Just listen, and you'll find that it's quite a wonderful tool. There's this wonderful Zen koan that they give all Zen, a lot of Zen students are given this koan. It says, what is the sound of one hand clapping? I'm sure you've heard it, many people have. But one hand can't make a sound, because in order for a sound to appear, two objects have to be struck together. So how do you answer that question? So there's a wonderful story of a young student that went to see the Zen master and said, oh, Zen master, teach me the way, and the master said, well, what do you want to know? He said, I want to achieve the truth. And the Zen master's heard that same, generic line all the time. And he says, well, all right, go and meditate on the sound of one hand clapping. So he goes away and he spends 2 days, and then he hears some girls singing. And he goes, that's it. And he runs to the master and says, I've got it. And the master said, what is it? He said, I know what the sound of one hand clapping, it's the sound of the girls singing. And he goes, no, that's not it. Go away. So he went away and he spent a month meditating. And then finally he heard the raindrops falling. And he said, that's it. It's the raindrops. That's what's making, that sound. So he went back and he said, that's the sound of one hand clapping. It's the raindrops. And the Zen master said, no. Go away and don't come back, until you got it. So a year passed and the student didn't appear. And so the master got worried. So he went looking for the man. He said, well, where's this guy disappeared to? And he found this student under a tree. The master saw the student and he was rocking back and forth slowly, almost like a branch in the trees, but not smiling, but with this very calm presence about him. and he saw the man under the tree sitting in silence. And he didn't disturb the man. And for a few hours, the student just sat there. And when the student opened his eyes, the master just looked at him, and the student said, "This is it." And the master said, "This is it." So what is it? We don't know, right? But that's what you could say enlightenment, right? It's that flowing with that eternal sound that does not make a sound. So it's the other side. So the one sound is the thing that you hear, but it's the silence is the other half of it, right? Yeah. So I thought that story was beautiful. So there's a lot to silence, and I think that for me, I think it's your presence is amplified in you being silent. Now, to be silent means that you're not interpreting, and secondly, you're not having dialogues constantly with yourself while that other person is with you. And whether that person is speaking or not, listening does not only involve listening to someone speaking, because you can be in the presence of the person and you can be listening. So listening happens not through the ears alone, right? It happens through the skin, actually, because you can pick up vibrations, you can pick up the essence of the person. So I think it's the most divine act possible. It is replicating the divine, is to be a presence for someone. And I think it's the most radical act of love, is to be fully present with someone. And to be fully present with someone is not to say, right, I'm listening to you, tell me what you got to say. Because that's not listening. That's just stopping your usual chatter for interruption, a pause. No, so you discard your project and you allow this thing in front of you, this person or this instrument, to be everything. So you've become wholly immersed into it, which I think is the most beautiful thing in the world. So yeah, I could talk endlessly about this topic, because it's a topic that I love talking about, and I think it's very much needed for everybody in this time now, where stimulation is constant. We don't even realize that most of the time when we're looking at stuff on the screens, we have the sound off. Right, so we're just engaging with our eyes, right, and nothing's actually happening. Because I think if we actually engage with our ears, it would slow us down. And I think that's why people listen to all these reels and these quick short videos with the sound off, because then we can rush through it. Because the sound slows you down, because you've got to actually listen to what the person is saying, right, or what's being said. And I think, and it means that you've got to become present, right? More present than you were.
Oh, there's a new trend which I didn't know. People listen to voicemails now on double speed.
Yeah. So and YouTube videos and everything on double speed, which is just that. So listening has become something that is really diminished as a very powerful tool. So yeah, I think musicians play a vital role, and I think you bringing musicians to a point of stillness within themselves would be very valuable. So before even asking them to compose or to produce or to play something, is to start off with listening and to tune in with exercises on becoming so fully present. And if musicians are not great communicators, but they're great listeners, in other words, they're great at being present, they don't need to say much, because their presence would be so magnificent, because all their focus will be attended to. And that's what attention is attending to, right? So you have attended to the person in front of you, to the instrument in front of you, to the sound that you're listening to, and focusing, moving your attention 100% through everything. It's very powerful than us diluting our attention all over the place.
Presence is very important,
Yeah.
especially in a time that is so much information, so many people, so many being present and paying attention. It's a very important skill. I think it changes the world around you. your
Definitely.
presence.
Yeah, presence is the single most important thing, and it's very difficult to do in a world of distraction. And social media depends on your distraction to keep it flowing. Because if they didn't keep on stealing your attention, they wouldn't make money because they make money from your attention. So, uh, but we have to be compassionate to ourselves, not harsh on ourselves. Because what many people do, oh well, I just can't stop scrolling. I've got to stop scrolling. No, I think that's the wrong approach, because that doesn't make you stop scrolling. I think you allow yourself the fact that you are distracted, allow yourself that you can't find presence. Just this allowing will allow something else to emerge, where you will say, you know what, I think I'm going to spend a few minutes being present. I'll allow myself that too. Because the other approach is, I'll stop doing this and I'll start doing this and I'll start. It leads to a very toxic relationship with yourself, I think.
Thank you, Rishad. Is there
Well,
anything else you want to add?
no, that's great. I could, yeah, I could talk forever, but yeah, thank you, Maria, for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.